In 1897, British soldiers broke into a palace in West Africa and found something that made them freeze. Not gold, not diamonds, something that would end up in the British museums and private collections worth over $2 billion today. But here's what they didn't expect. This wealth wasn't new. Nigeria had been obscenely rich for over 800 years before anyone ever discovered oil. And the way they did it, it's not in your history books. This is the story of how a civilization built an empire so wealthy. European merchants traveled 6,000 miles just to beg for trading rights. And when that empire fell, the world tried to erase it ever existed. February 1897, a British punitive expedition, and yes, that's actually what they called it, storms into Benin City in what's now southern Nigeria. They are expecting a primitive village. What they find instead stops them cold. Streets wider than any in London, walls that stretched for 10,000 miles, longer than the Great Wall of China, and inside the palace, over 10,000 bronze plates, sculptures, and artifacts so sophisticated that European archaeologists later claimed Africans couldn't have made them. But here's the thing, those bronze were just leftovers. The real wealth, the British had already been trading with this empire for 400 years. They knew exactly how rich Benin was. That's why they came with 1,200 soldiers. So let's rewind. Because this story doesn't start with Europeans. It starts in the year 1200 AD with a secret that would make one kingdom the wealthiest in West Africa. While Europe is still crawling out of the dark ages, the Kingdom of Benin discovers something growing in their forests. Melengueta pepper. Doesn't sound impressive, right? Wrong. This wasn't just any spice. It was so valuable, the entire West African coast became known as the Grain Coast. But why would pepper make you rich? Because in medieval Europe, spices were everything. They preserved meat, they masked the taste of rotten food, and they were literally used as currency. A pound of pepper could buy you land. But here's the problem. Europe was being crushed by a monopoly. The Silk Road was controlled by Middle Eastern and Italian merchants who charged 30 times markup. A single pound of black pepper that cost 1 silver coin in India would cost 30 in London. Europe was desperate for an alternative. And then, Portuguese sailors reached the West African coast in 1472. When they tasted Melengueta pepper, they called it grains of paradise. It was hotter than Asian black pepper. It grew abundantly in West Africa, and most importantly, Benin controlled it all. Within 50 years, Benin wasn't just rich, it was a superpower. Let me paint you a picture of Benin City in 1500, and I'm not making this up. This comes from actual European eyewitness accounts. The city stretched for 25 square miles. The walls were 60 feet high in places, made of earth so compacted that they are still standing today, 500 years later. The main street was 120 feet wide, wider than Broadway. The palace had hundreds of courtyards, each one filled with bronze sculptures. Meanwhile, London in 1500, narrow, muddy streets, open sewers, wooden buildings packed so tight that fire has regularly burned down entire neighborhoods. A Dutch merchant who visited both cities wrote, "The town of Benin is so large that you cannot see from one end to the other." But here is what really made Benin unstoppable. They didn't just sell pepper, they controlled the entire supply chain. The Oba, that's the king, didn't just let Europeans into the interior. They had to trade through Benin City at prices Benin set. No negotiations, no expectations. And if you didn't like it, there were Portuguese, Dutch, French, and English ships all waiting in line behind you. This is where it gets insane. The Portuguese so desperate to maintain their relationship with Benin that when the Oba sent ambassadors to Lisbon in 1486, the King of Portugal personally received them. An African kingdom had European royalty bowing. The bronze casting techniques Benin used, Europe wouldn't achieve that level of sophistication for another 200 years. German metallurgists analyzed the Benin bronze and found that they used a lost wax casting method so precise the walls were 3 to 5 millimeters thick. That's the weight of 2 pennies. Okay, so Pepe made Benin rich, but if that's all there was to this story, they would have collapsed when the spice trade shifted. They didn't, because Benin had already moved on. By 1500, Benin had diversified into 4 major industries: ivory, textiles, metalwork, and, this is the controversial part, enslaved people. Let's be clear, the Atlantic slave trade was a catastrophe that devastated Africa for 400 years. But in the 1500s, before it exploded into the nightmare it became, Benin was reluctant to participate. The Obaesige actually banned the export of enslaved people in the 1520s. Why? Because Benin was making more money from everything else. Ivory alone was massive. Benin's artisans carved tucks into intricate sculptures that sold for 50 times the price of raw ivory. A single carved tux could buy you 20 acres of European farmland. Textiles, Benin weavers created cloth of Benin, a cotton fabric so fine Europeans called it African silk. A bolt of this cloth could trade for a horse in England. And here's the part that blows my mind. Benin wasn't just trading with Europe. They had trade routes that stretched to India, North Africa, and across the Sahara. They were playing on a global level. By the 1600s, the Kingdom of Benin had been continuously wealthy for 400 years, 4 centuries of prosperity, no collapse, no dark age, just growth. So what happened? How does a 400-year-old empire disappear from history books? That's where this story gets dark. By 1800, something had shifted. The Atlantic slave trade had exploded, and West African kingdoms were either participating or being destroyed. Benin held out longer than most, but the pressure was mounting. European powers weren't interested in trade partners anymore. They wanted colonies, and Benin, sitting on some of the most valuable land in Africa, was in the way. In January 1897, a British diplomatic delegation tried to enter Benin City during a sacred festival. They were warned not to come. They came anyway. They were killed. The British response: 1,200 soldiers, naval bombardments, and orders to teach Benin a lesson. They burned Benin City to the ground. 1,000 years of history gone. The bronze, the ivories, the artifacts, they were looted and shipped to Europe. Today, the British Museum holds over 900 Benin bronze. Nigeria has been asking for them for 60 years. And here's the twist that should make you very angry. Those primitive artifacts Britain claimed Africans couldn't have made, they have been valued at over $2 billion. The British Museum's entire African collection, built largely on Benin, is worth an estimated $4.5 billion. Benin didn't just get conquered, they got erased, and then robbed, and then told they were never sophisticated to begin with. So, why does this story matter? Why am I spending 20 minutes telling you about a kingdom most people have never heard of? Because when we talk about Africa, the narrative is always the same: poverty, colonization, tribes. We were taught that Africa was uncivilized until Europeans arrived. That's not just wrong, it is designed to be wrong. Before oil was discovered in the Niger Delta in 1956, Nigeria had been wealthy for 8 centuries, not through luck, not through natural resources alone, through innovation, trade, diplomacy, and art. The Kingdom of Benin built a civilization so advanced that European visitors wrote in awe of its sophistication. They created art so beautiful, museums around the world still refuse to give it back. This isn't ancient history. The last Oba of Benin who remembered the kingdom at its height died in 1914. We are only two generations removed from people who lived in that world. So the next time someone asks how Nigeria got rich, don't say oil, say 800 years of trade mastery, artistic genius, and political sophistication, because that's the real story. And it's one the world doesn't want you to know. If this story changed how you see African history, leave a comment. And if you want more untold stories like this, subscribe, because next week we are covering a more interesting story about how Nigeria defeated England in 1967. You won't want to miss it.